Good morning, everyone. We are going to talk today about our next topic in our medical ethics course. This is on justice. Poverty leads to higher likelihood of health problems, and we're going to jump straight in. So, um, what does the idea of poverty mean? Poverty is always relative to country, right? So there are poor people in every country, but what poor means has different definitions. Of course, if you live in the US or Germany, France, high income countries, then being poor is going to be relative to what the average income is, the median income is, and there are poor people because the prices are also adjusted to how much money people have and can spend in those countries. So if you uh, if your income and wealth is low compared to the average of your country's um, prices, then you will be poor because you can't afford many things. But there is also a global standard, which is, I think, at the moment about $2 a day. If you have less than that, then you count as extremely poor. But many people criticize this measure and say that $5 or even maybe 8.5 would be more realistic measures of poverty. If you have less than that for a day, for all your expenses, housing, health, education, food, shelter, your bills, electricity, heating, water, clothing, and so on and so on, then you are definitely poor. It doesn't matter how poor your country is, even the poorest places globally, that just won't be enough to live a decent life. Now, we are talking, of course, here in the context of medical ethics about health related things. And so this is from the United Nations. The United Nations and WHO, the World Health Organization, produce reports every year on global health, and WHO has this material specifically on social determinants of health, and we can see that we have widening health inequalities globally. This is from 2025, and that means that the inequality in the world and as many countries, especially many high-income countries, are getting bigger, not smaller. We would expect that if humanity is developing and if better technology, larger economies, things improve. But whether things improve or not depends on how politicians and other decision makers in finance and business handle these things. So what we see is that the widening health inequality really undermines health and well-being. We find this in every single country, so this is very robust. Nobody can question it. Some people try, but some people question everything. You don't have to take everything seriously. And in some countries, the life expectancy gap between people who are doing well financially and people who are not can be as great as 33 years. Um, People with higher educational attainment in general, everywhere in the world, have better health and lifespans. So education is crucial. Education is, however, also something that depends on how much money your family has. If you're growing up in a family where it's very important that you start work at an early age, or your family simply cannot pay for your university education or for you to finish your high school, or there are no good schools near to your living place due to the weak infrastructure or government corruption or whatever else, whatever other reason, the poverty of your country or war, then you're at a big disadvantage throughout your life and your whole family as well. Um, a lot of lives could be saved year on year if we could um, help eliminating wealth related inequality. Now, the number of lives saved would be, of course, much bigger in low and middle income countries because poverty again is can be looked at in an absolute way, and in an absolute way, poverty doesn't exist in high income countries. So even if you're poor in, say, South Korea or Japan or Taiwan Hungary. Being poor doesn't mean that you cannot go on living. It just means that your life expectancy will be lower. In general, your health will likely be worse. You get more avoidable illnesses. You have less access to good healthcare, treatments, scannings. You're less likely to find out if you have cancer on time and so on. But you can still lead a relatively decent life, most likely. Not always. There are exceptions. Um, but in some low and some middle income countries, of course, being poor can mean that your access to healthcare will be so bad that you just might not survive diseases and problems, illnesses, health issues, lack of food that you would survive in other contexts. Um, it would be quite easy to fix this. So it requires very little GDP investment in social protection and labor market, housing, community policies. Housing policies, government could either regulate rent prices much better or offer more social housing in many places. Labor market, workplaces should be protected better. People should have better access to healthcare and social protection in general, right? Could be improved. It doesn't remind. It's not a question of enormous money. Basic protections. We're not talking about providing people with the highest level of cancer care or end of life care. That's enormously expensive. But obviously, we are just talking here about minimums, vaccinations, basic antibiotics, basic medications. If you have a flu, a nasty cold, to prevent it from developing into something like pneumonia or something more serious. Screening for parasites that are common in certain places, providing malaria protective kits, and so on. The problem is again just one of economic and political will. Are the big banks, financial circles, politicians, big businesses who decide about how economic budgets are made, how countries spend their money, whether they are willing to spend on this or not. At the moment, not that much, sadly. So we need to pressure them, but that's a different topic. Health inequalities are related to economic inequality and discrimination. Also climate disruption. So climate change is going to make these things worse, since a lot of viruses and bacteria are going to move to areas where the climate changes in ways that the animals carrying them, the parasites carrying them, certain slugs, mosquitoes, flies, will be able to live in countries where they were not able to live before, because the temperature is going up, there will be different climate conditions. And this is going to create a lot of new challenges and a lot of new health problems. Higher temperatures in general are going to create problems with food supplies and water excess, which will increase health problems as well. So this is the general frame. So how does inequality look, right? So we mentioned that inequality in general is important for this because it's a strong predictor of health outcomes. So the state of global income inequality is quite interesting if you look at it. The darker a country is on this map, the higher the Gini index is. The Gini index shows it's from 0, which is a state of perfect equality, to 100, total inequality. Total inequality would be if one person would possess everything in a country. A 0 would be if everyone would have exactly the same. Obviously, neither of these are possible in reality. The Gini should never be 0 or 100, and that's not a desire. It shouldn't be. Nobody's arguing for that. But lower Gini scores in the 10s, 20s, lower 30s show that societies do much better on life expectancy in general, the average. That actually people have income inequality. And these things relate also to how much influence people can have on politics, how their life quality is in general, how much time they have for their family, the meaningful activities in their life outside of work. And you can see that some countries have extreme inequality. Brazil and some countries in South America have very high inequality. Some parts of Africa, South Africa, Namibia, Angola, for example. And the US and Mexico are doing really poorly in this respect as well. Um, Turkey too. And what these things mean is that in these countries, there is a small layer of society, a few percent of people, 1 to 5, 1 to 3, 1 to 10%, who are who own everything: the factories, the production lines, the companies, the big investments, the large amounts of money which are invested into different things, the land, the intellectual property. And these people have maybe 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 times more money than the average person, whereas the average person's real wages and wealth is probably quite low. You see moderate inequality in a range of countries. Some places in South America, Canada, most of Europe is relatively low or moderate inequality, and most of Asia, China, Mongolia, India, you can see Japan, South Korea, Australia, they're moderate inequality countries where there is a layer of extremely rich people who probably have most of the political power as well, but the much larger part of society still owns considerable wealth in total. Um, Now we can see that might still mean that health is bad because the country is poor overall, right? In some places of Saharan Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, or some parts of India, some parts of Southeast Asia, where healthcare is still pretty dire. But we can see that some countries which have great healthcare, like Germany, UK, France, Italy, Japan, where people have very high life expectancies and have access to almost comprehensive healthcare at pretty low cost, they do have some inequality. So again, this is a question mostly of political will. How much do the people leading the country, the money circles, business, finance, investment, the political circles and the military circles care about these kind of things? How do they manage the power and economic relationships within a country? You can see that in countries where they care a little bit more about equality, usually they care about health more as well. So the US is a very rich country, but it has quite bad health outcomes, especially compared to how much money is invested. Some countries like Spain or Portugal, which are economically not that large and robust and haven't seen a lot of growth in the last 10 years, 15 years, or Greece, which struggled with a lot of financial problems, still offer good healthcare and still care somewhat about inequality. So again, this is about political will mainly, not about money, at least if you're at least a middle income country. So one of the things that inequality looks at is if you compare the richest and the poorest 10% of the country, then what is the income and the consumption? So how much money do people get every month? How much can they spend? And you can see that for Brazil, for example, people who are low earners get around $161 in 2024. So that would be what, Nimango Sen yen per month in yen. And the people who are in the top 10%, so these are not just the richest people, but like, maybe some people from the upper middle class, they earn 10 times more. In the US, this is a little bit less high, but in the US we would get a very strange statistics if we wouldn't look at just the top 10%, but we would look at the, say, top 5 or top 3, then the differences are insane. And you can see that because the US is of course much richer than Brazil, even the poorest 10% earn considerably more than they do in a country like Brazil, 5 times more. And it's similar for high income people. In Germany, you see a smaller difference. Germany is a moderate inequality country, whereas Brazil and US have high inequality. Angola has high inequality, and again, you see that in Angola, some Madagascar, which are low-income countries, developing countries, the minimum is very, very little. So if someone earns this much money per month, then they're definitely poor in an absolute sense as well. They simply don't have enough money for the basics. And you see something like Vietnam. Vietnam is developing and relatively low-income country, but it is developing now relatively fast and is becoming a robustly middle-income country quite quickly. And you see a similar inequality rate to Germany, and you can see that they are slowly starting to do better. And interestingly, if you compare Vietnam, people who are poor still make more money on average than in Brazil, which is a much larger country and probably about double the size in terms of population of Vietnam, territory wise probably much bigger. So again, you can see that how money is distributed in rich countries depends very much on political will, redistribution, taxation, and so on and so on. And there's no surprise that in some countries then, even if you have lower income, you have somewhat better access to healthcare. But still, your health won't be very good. And of course, if your country is poor in an absolute sense, it's going to be very hard to have access to any meaningful level of healthcare. So in many countries which are poor, people do rely on global support through the United Nations or other organizations. And what we see is that sadly there is a decline in general in global freedom. This has to be understood in the broader political context of the U.S.-China competition sharpening up, and the U.S. Becoming more authoritarian, Russia becoming more assertive, and China becoming economically very successful, and of course other countries have to follow what the great powers are doing. So in general there is a tendency at the moment towards using military power more, being more aggressive, exerting more economic pressure, and cracking down on dissent within the country. You can see this globally. Europe is somewhat better in this sense, but that has its own issues. And some of the problems are that relate to this, not just health related, but if there are high inequalities, we can see that social mobility kind of stops. If you're born low income, you're probably going to be stuck low income for most of your life. Same for middle income, and same for high income people. They don't really shift. High inequality usually goes together with levels of corruption, which keeps the same people and the same circles in power, which makes people vulnerable and unsafe, insecure, and also undermines trust in institutions and government, justly, because it's mostly their fault that inequality is growing. And we have a lot of other issues at the moment. Technology, how AI is going to affect job security, climate change, and some other issues. So there's plenty that would need to be done. Now, what can be done? Well, policies can be adjusted, and hopefully people realize that politicians are a bit easier to pressure than it is believed at the moment, and we will see more resistance to these kind of trends coming from voters and citizens in globally. But until that happens, we are probably going to see rises in inequality for a while, especially with the deployment of new AI and companies getting rid of a lot of their workforce. All right, so what about life expectancy? How does it look? Well, you can see that the places where life expectancy is really good are all high-income countries, right? So if you're born in Hong Kong, Japan, South Korea, French Polynesia, Andorra, Switzerland, Australia, Singapore, Italy, Spain, France, Norway, these are all very high-income countries, very stable, large economies. Reunion is French Polynesia are listed here separately, but they are effectively parts of France. And you can see that in these cases people can expect on average to live this long, which means that of course some people are going to die earlier in their maybe 60s or 70s if they are unfortunate, or they develop some kind of serious disease early and die from an accident. But a lot of people on the other end are going to live well into their 90s and even to 100. So right, this is definitely linked to higher levels of income, and you can see that other countries, Malta, Sweden, Macau, UAE, these are all high income countries. Now, one of the other things that you can see is that there are a lot of countries, some East Asian countries are here, and people do link life expectancy to diet, comparatively lower high cholesterol and high cholesterol food, less butter, and less red meat consumption, and in general lower calories per meal. And you can also see that many Mediterranean countries, Italy, Spain, some parts of France, right, Malta are here as well. And these countries traditionally within Europe stand out, and for similar reasons their diet tends to be healthier and higher quality. Also lifestyle wise, people culturally try to ensure a better work-life balance often. Although this is going to vary very largely within a country like France. Of course, if you go to Paris, you will see the very similar attitudes to business and finances in New York. Whereas if you go somewhere like countryside, south, east, it's going to be very different. And you have to scroll quite far down to find any, to see more middle income countries pop up, like Slovenia and Chile and Costa Rica, and these countries, Czech Republic, are still economically quite developed, and historically, partly for historical reasons, they have good healthcare systems. Now, one of the things that you see is that the US, the world's largest economy and richest country at the moment, in some GDP measures, they aren't doing very well, and one of the reasons for this is that the government doesn't really supply universal health insurance, and there are many preventable illnesses and diseases that people don't get cover for, and because of the relative poverty, many people cannot afford to have a health insurance or a good health coverage. So even if they have some kind of health insurance, not every health problem will be covered and addressed by that. You also see an interesting thing that in East European, Central European countries, there's often a lower life expectancy, despite them having, Hungary is a good example, despite them having very good health education and health systems. And this is, again, as we mentioned, cultural factors also play into it, and politics. These countries tend to have higher corruption rates and more problems in how government handles money. This is one. The other is culturally, the rates of alcoholism and really unhealthy eating and being overweight are actually pretty high in many East European countries. Right, Albania is here a big exception, and the Czech Republic, but the exception in a way strengthens the rule. Right, so these are some basics that we see all the time. So you can see that there are very strong connections between the health problems and the inequality. Now, one of the things related to this, a moral point, is something that Peter Singer emphasized in his legendary paper Famine, Affluence, and Morality. This is from 1972, but it has been republished countless times. And Singer's point here is that already back then, right, this is more than 50 years ago, but the same holds true today, solving a lot of these problems wouldn't require much money on a global standard. It is, again, the willingness. A lot of people who do have the money and control the money would rather invest that money into new military technology or financial initiatives than fixing these issues. So Singer in this paper postulated a thought experiment, and the thought experiment is very simple. Imagine that you're on your way to work, and on your way to work would be, you would see a pond, and there would be a child in the small pond, right? So she's the baby or a little child, maybe a toddler, 2 to 3 years old, or 1.5, maybe 1.5, 2.5 years old. They can already walk, but not very stable. So this child is playing alone, there's no one around, and you see them fall. And because at that age, children still panic easily, and they're not, their movement coordination is not that developed. They might not be able to get up. So even if the water is quite shallow, say 40 centimeters, they might drown. Since no one is around, you're the only one who can save this child. Do you have a duty to save this drowning child? What is going to happen to you? Well, the water is very shallow. It reaches maybe up to your knee, but it might ruin your new shoes and your new pants. You might need to clean them thoroughly, or maybe it ruins them so much that you might need to buy a new shoe, a new pair of pants. So this is your cost, your risk. Under these circumstances, do you have a duty to save the child? I think all of us would say, and in fact, there have been people who tested this, everyone says that of course you should save the child. There is a moral duty to save the child. This is not controversial. So Singer then draws an analogy. If we donate to charity, that's a very low cost activity, right? So you can, if you live in an affluent, rich country like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, US, China, Hungary, Germany, whatever, Norway, you can very easily donate a few dollars a day, say $1 to $5, $1 to $10. It's not going to make much difference to your financial situation, unless you're very poor in these countries. But most people who attend university won't be very poor. Statistically, that's shown. So you could basically save almost every day by donation a child, in the sense that your donations, if you donate to efficient charities, can cover basic medical costs, living support. They can go to charities which help people to establish their own businesses. They can provide food in areas which are, there is a war, so people can't farm and shops can't get food, and so on and so on and so on. Now, what follows from this, Singer says, is that basically if you're not doing any charity or some larger actions, say pressuring your government in very significant and efficient ways to solve these problems, then you're not doing your duty. It's the same as if you would let the child drown. You would say, oh, well, the child fell. Who cares? It's going to die. Not my job to save them, even if no one else is around. So, obviously, Singer thinks we have a duty to help, and we really should help. This is an interesting and very influential point that he makes here, and this article is legendary, and many people actually do take it seriously. Many high-income people who have read it or know about it have cited as a big influence on their behavior and attitude to donations, charity, and how to solve these kind of problems. Now, one of the issues is, and this has been pointed out by different authors, but one very efficient way of pointing this out has been written up by Travis Timmerman. He wrote an article where he says that sometimes there's nothing wrong with letting a child drown. Now, of course, Timmerman doesn't mean this literally. If you really see the child drown, you should go and help it. Timmerman's point is a little bit different. Timmerman's point is basically that, look, Singer's argument can be reconstructed in this way. Suffering and death from lack of food, shelter, and medical care are bad. Right? Bad in every way, including morally. If it is in your power to prevent something bad from happening, without sacrificing anything nearly as important, like in the child's case, you can save a life, all you lose is maybe your new pair of shoes, it is wrong if you don't do it, right? You're not sacrificing anything very valuable, and you're saving someone's life, the most precious thing, or save them from great suffering. By donating to aid agencies, you can prevent suffering and death from lack of food, shelter, and medical care without sacrificing anything nearly as important. I mean, let's be honest, most of us who live in high-income countries, we spend every day probably on a coffee, on an ice cream, on a chocolate bar, on a dessert, on that in itself, depending on where you live, can be anything from $2 to $10, right? A lot of us have hobbies where we really casually spend something between $20 to $150 a month. Some people play computer games, some people go to the gym, some people buy equipment for, I don't know, mountain hiking, paragliding, do-it-yourself projects. People buy expensive tools to modify their cars. People buy expensive cosmetics. A lot of people are into makeup and beauty care and buy very expensive creams on a regular basis, and so on and so on. People decorate their houses with new furniture. We spend way more money than what would make a very big difference of the life of others, and we spend these on things that are nearly not as important as a human's life or well-being. So, Singer's point is wrong if you do not donate to aid agencies, right? You're really morally bad. Well, not necessarily completely, but what you're doing every time you make a choice of not donating or ignoring such a duty, you're doing something bad. You might still be a good person because you might offset your badness in other ways, but you are failing at least some of your moral duties. Now, the interesting thing is, of course, nobody doubts that there is a very strong point and a very strong pull. Singer's argument is very convincing. What Timmerman points out is, imagine that you face a situation where you could prevent something bad from happening. You don't have to sacrifice in that single action anything of comparable moral importance, so you have to do it. Now, the original example is right. You're walking to work and you see one child. So, of course, saving one child is not a big thing. But Timmerman says, well, imagine that it's not one child. Imagine a case where you would be walking to work, and his example is this: Lisa. Lisa needs to get to work, right? It's the morning. But she gets a phone call, and some hackers have access to her bank account, and they're taking out $200 every 5 minutes until she goes in person to the bank to shut down her account. Okay, so fortunately the bank is very close. Lisa can get over there very quickly, and she sees that there are hundreds of shallow ponds, and in each of them there is a small child who will drown unless someone pulls them to safety. And there's no one else to pull them out. But every time Lisa spends time rescuing a child, she loses around $200 because the hackers who have accessed her bank account are going to pull the money until she goes to the bank, right, to stop this. So Lisa has to decide how many children she rescues before entering the bank, or she just loses all her money. Even then she might not be able to rescue all the children. So the problem is, add to this, imagine every day the same happens. Some hackers access Lisa's account, and every time she would go to the bank to stop the account, put it on hold until the issue is sorted, there are a lot of drowning children. What's Timmerman's point with this crazy thought experiment? But Timmerman says there are so many people who need help, right? There are millions and millions, literally in the 100 millions of people who need help with basic medicine and food issues. Then there are probably tens of millions of people, or maybe easily 100 million and more, who have been displaced. There's a serious war in their country and they had to flee, they had to leave their house, their job, they don't have anything, they live somewhere in a refugee camp in a tent on donations from other people on a very low level. Some people estimate that there are 3 to 4 million refugees in Turkey, for example, from the different wars in that region, right? Palestine, Syria, Iraq, and so on. Now, obviously, these people need help. Some people would add that there are a lot of people who suffered some catastrophe, right? There has been an earthquake, a tsunami, whatever in their country. They need help. Some people would then add that, all right, but look, climate change is making farming increasingly impossible in a lot of countries around the equator, in the hotter countries. Those people, what are they going to do? They need help. And so on and so on. So if you add up all these people, we're talking about billions and billions of issues where we need to help. Do I have a duty to help all the children, save all the children? Does Lisa have a duty to save all the children? Timmerman's point is no, because there has to be some limit on this duty. Otherwise, Lisa basically saves children until she dies from thirst and hunger, having lost all her money and energy, right? If we want to help others, even if we're very serious about helping others, we need an income and we need a stable life that keeps our physical and mental health at a good level where we can continue working and taking care of probably discharge at least our special duties to our friends and family. Right? They need our care as well, and that's morally very important too. And there are other morally important things in life as well. We have to pay some taxes towards police, military, research, a good healthcare system in our own country, a good education system. Otherwise, other people won't be able to grow up healthily and become people who can help those who are less lucky and have been born in countries where they can't earn enough to help others, right? So we do have a special duty. Timmerman isn't saying that Singer is entirely wrong. Timmerman does say that we should probably donate a lot more than we do, right? Most people don't do much, not much volunteering, not much donation, and both of these things are actually correlated with happiness. So if you do take on some duty like this, you're probably going to do better in life in terms of your happiness and well-being as well. But that's not the only reason. You shouldn't just do this for selfish reasons. There does seem to be really a moral duty that, sometimes sacrifice Starbucks coffee, sometimes sacrifice eating out at a nice restaurant, sometimes sacrifice spending a little bit of money on your hobby. And nobody's saying, sacrifice everything. That would be crazy, because at some point your mental health will suffer, and people around you will suffer, and that doesn't make sense, because then you won't be able to go on and do good things. But try to help at least at a meaningful level, right? Now, obviously, my group, everyone is a student, your income is not that high, but at some point you're all graduating from university and living in high-income countries. You do have a duty to help. You can ignore this, but that's on you, and it's fair to judge anyone who ignores their moral duties. So, it's an interesting discussion. Of course, there are a lot of other papers and a lot of other iterations. Where exactly is the right limit? How much should we donate? Singer, in some talks, recommended that people should commit to something between 5 to 15% of their income. I know people personally who graduated from very high-level universities who committed to much higher levels. Some people who got very high-earning jobs in finance, banking, law, real estate, tech. They donated almost 50% of their income for several years, and some of them 20-30%. Usually, these people have a bit of a burnout after a while, so I think it makes more sense to commit in the long term with a more reasonable rate that you adjust to your income and your other life goals. Of course, you'll have times in your life maybe when your job is under pressure, your parents are becoming very old and they need care, your children are at some critical junctions, they're going to uni, and you should take care of your special obligations. But that doesn't mean that even at those points, people in high-income countries can justify donating zero. I mean, that's absolutely unrealistic. And I think we should all think about this more seriously, especially with taking into account the fact that right now we are the lucky ones living in high-income countries, having good access to healthcare, having a lot of safety in our lives. But the inequality is in our favor. Our countries make a lot of money on other countries' resources and workforce, but this might change due to many people losing their jobs as AI advances, or climate change creating a lot of political pressure and countries having to reorganize in significant ways, or wars. So you might be at some point the unlucky one. And that's also one reason why people should always keep in mind that solidarity and helping others is very important. You might need help, even though right now we are the lucky ones living in these safe, rich countries with good healthcare and good life outcomes. Anyway, these are the philosophical ideas and the factual points I wanted to introduce you regarding health, life, and our moral duties to support others. And I'll post a question connected to this topic. I hope you found it interesting. If you are interested in donating, there's some really good websites. For example, Giving What We Can is a charity. They employ many people who are experts on finance and law, and they work together with other charities to look at which charities are very efficient. So if you donate to them, say they care about animal welfare, global health and well-being, global catastrophic risk, or other issues, which ones are the most efficient? And this organization looks at the accounting of these charities very seriously, and they only recommend organizations which where most of your money, really like 80-90% of your money is going to go to the people who need help. The rest is going to help the organizations to run. Of course, they need to pay some of their employees, they need to advertise and get people to donate to them, so they have some costs, which is a normal thing. And you can see that some of their initiatives, Give Well Foundation, New Incentives, they are very robust. The Malaria Foundation, the Hello Keller International, they do great work. So again, these are the most efficient, but there are a couple of other places. And of course, if you donate to the UN, if you donate to an organization like Doctors Without Borders, they are doing an amazing job as well. They're very robust, transparent organizations that definitely use your money in good, sensible ways. Again, you see, we're not talking enormous amounts. If you donate $7, that can already protect a child through the malaria season. And malaria kills about 600,000 people per year. Most of them are young children. A lot of adults can survive, but kids not. So, some basic medicine and equipment that the parents can use, like nets against mosquitoes that they can put up, helps a lot. And this is very cheap, and you're saving a life, pulling out the drowning child, right? For the price of coffee, that's not much. So I recommend you all to think about this and form your own plans and policies in life, always taking into account that charity and solidarity are very important values. Thank you for your attention. Have a great day, and hope to see you soon.